Jacob Scott Brady, who went by Jake, was born on October 13, 1993, and grew up in Westlake, Louisiana. In school, he played just about every sport, but his favorite was always football. Jake also spent a lot of time outdoors, hunting and fishing. After graduating from high school, Jake enrolled at McNeese State University in Lake Charles, Louisiana. His time there was brief, though, after he chose to pursue a modeling career, a decision that ultimately took him to Colorado. There, he secured representation with the Wilhelmina Denver agency. Once in Colorado, Jake's love for the outdoors became even more apparent. He spent a lot of his free time hiking with his dog Bella, always by his side. He also loved to attend concerts at the famous Red Rocks Amphitheater. Friends in Colorado described him as having a big heart and said he always saw the good in people. Around 2015, he was sent to Milan, Italy, through the Wilhelmina Denver agency for modeling work. At some point, he moved back to Louisiana and found a job. However, Denver kept calling him, and in 2021, he moved back. This time, however, a horrible tragedy would occur. The day after Thanksgiving, on November 26, 2021, at 1:06 p.m., Denver police received a call about a deceased man in the 4500 block of West 2nd Avenue. When officers arrived, they found Jake dead from a gunshot wound. Unfortunately, his murder was overshadowed by other murders in the area the same weekend, and very little information has been released about his death. If you have any information about the murder of Jacob Scott Brady, please call Crime Stoppers at 720-913-7867. You can also submit tips online at metrodenvercrimestoppers.com. Tipsters can even remain anonymous and be eligible for a financial reward. Jake was murdered on November 26, 2021, and as of January 2026, this case remains unsolved. Marjorie Sue Fithian was born on June 4, 1952, to Betty and Robert Fithian. In 1970, she graduated from Greeley Central High School in Greeley, Colorado. By the age of 23, she had remained in Greeley and was now the mother of an 18-month-old son named Dylan Sage Fithian, who went by his middle name, and was a student at Ames Community College. Unfortunately, a trip to Denver in the summer of 1975 would turn deadly. On Friday, June 20th, Marjorie and baby Sage traveled by bus from Greeley to Denver and spent the weekend with family with plans to return home on Tuesday, June 24th. The morning they were scheduled to leave, Marjorie's uncle dropped her and the baby off at the bus station about 10 minutes before the bus's 7:30 departure. Strangely, they never boarded the bus. 2 hours later, around 9 a.m., and about 50 miles away from Denver, ranch hand Terry Furnish, who was working the Painter Ranch in Rogan, Colorado, was driving across the property when they spotted something unusual. About a mile into his drive, along Weld County Road 386, he came upon Marjorie's body lying in the middle of the gravel road. She'd been shot twice in the head, but was still alive. Sitting beside her, in a pile of broken glass, was Sage, clutching his mother's hand. Terry moved Sage out of the pile of glass and rushed to another truck with a two-way radio that was only about a quarter mile away. After making the necessary calls, he returned to the scene and stayed with Sage until Weld County deputies and Colorado state officials showed up. A handful of ranch hands had also heard about the situation and showed up at the scene. Unfortunately, due to the remote location, the ambulance took a very long time, and Marjorie died en route to the hospital. While Sage was able to talk, he was not able to provide any pertinent details. At the scene, investigators found spent .25 caliber shell casings and Marjorie's suitcase. Inside, amongst the clothes, was her mother's phone number, which is how they were able to identify Marjorie and Sage. Terry was questioned by the police, but told them he never saw any other cars on the road that morning. They then turned their attention to the residents of Rogan, who reported seeing Marjorie and Sage earlier that day, alone at a local cafe having breakfast. Other locals claimed to have seen a car in the area around the time of the shooting. stating it was a yellowish-brown, early 1960s two-door with a black roof, believed to be a Ford or Chevrolet. Not long after the murder, the Weld County Sheriff's Office arrested Jerry Eugene Walker and charged him with first-degree murder in the death of Marjorie. He had allegedly told 2 people that he had shot the, and I quote, bitch in the face. During his arrest, they searched his home for a .25 caliber weapon, ammunition, and or photos of Marjorie, but nothing was found, and due to lack of evidence, the charges were ultimately dismissed. With a lack of leads in the case, rumors began to spread. Some believed her death was due to drugs, but the only drug she had allegedly used on a regular basis was marijuana. Building off that rumor, some suggested she was transporting drugs from Greeley to Denver. A local drug dealer even came forward and claimed he picked her up from the bus station that morning, but when she failed to produce drugs or money, he watched as another drug dealer murdered her. However, about a year and a half later, he retracted his statement. Investigators then administered sodium pentothal, also known as truth serum, and at that point, he claimed he made the whole story up. Turns out, when he was first interviewed, he had been left alone in the interview room with Marjorie's case file open in front of him. It's worth noting that so-called truth serums, like sodium pentothal, don't actually force honesty and often produce unreliable, distorted information. It's been widely rejected by psychologists and neuroscientists and is not admissible in court in the U.S. It's basically junk science. That doesn't mean suspects haven't been truthful while on it, which is likely in this case, as the suspect went on to say he took it upon himself to read the documents and learn the details of her death. He said he had fabricated the story because he was angry at the man he named as Marjorie's killer for ratting him out. Other theories were that she was offered a ride and accepted, and while that might be true, they never found any solid leads to prove it. Her cousins that she was hanging out with that weekend were also questioned, but once again, nothing. After Marjorie's murder, Sage was raised by his aunt and grandmother. He now has kids of his own, but sadly doesn't remember anything about his mother, except what he's learned from his family. If you have any information regarding the murder of Marjorie Fithian, please call the Weld County Tip Line at 970-304-6464 or email them at crimetips@weld.gov. Marjorie was murdered on June 24, 1975, and as of January 2026, this case remains unsolved. Pamela Lynne Neal, who went by Pam or Pammy, was born on July 18, 1960, in Denver, Colorado. In 1978, she graduated from Cherry Creek High School and then attended Western State College in Gunnison. After college, Pam spent a year in Alaska working as a nature photographer before moving to Maine to live with her parents. Pam enjoyed spending time outdoors, especially camping, and was interested in plants and in making her own jewelry. Her mother described her as a shy, bright, and happy young woman who loved to laugh. By the age of 22, she was back in Colorado and working as a bank teller at Key Savings and Loan in Inglewood. She lived across the street from the bank, which allowed her to go home during her lunch breaks. Unfortunately, in the spring of 1983, while on her lunch break, a horrible tragedy occurred. At about 2 p.m. on March 31st, she left work and walked 2 blocks to another bank to cash her paycheck, then slipped several $100s in cash into the pocket of her tan leather coat. Afterward, she went to Safeway and bought fried chicken, macaroni and cheese, and a pack of Winston cigarettes, and a lottery ticket. She then returned to her apartment. Pam's roommate, Darlene Heinz, also worked at the bank, and from her teller window, she saw Pam entering their apartment building. Pam was expected back at 2:30 p.m., but when that time came and went with no sign of her, Darlene grew concerned. So she tried calling their apartment, but there was no answer. She tried one more time, but once again, nothing. At that point, Darlene decided to walk across the street to check on her. When she arrived, she found the door slightly open, with Pam's lunch bag sitting on the coffee table and her shoes under the table. Her purse was nearby, and the lottery ticket she had bought was inside, unscratched. Her cigarettes and apartment keys were also inside, but Pam was gone, as if she had vanished into thin air. Darlene then returned to the bank and told her manager, who contacted the police. Officers arrived and searched the apartment, but found no signs of a struggle. Since her shoes were under the coffee table, investigators believe she was barefoot when she disappeared. Some believe she may have been followed back to her apartment and abducted. It's possible her abductor saw her put the money from her paycheck in her coat pocket and initially planned to rob her. Although the surrounding streets were busy and no one reported seeing anything unusual, her apartment had a rear entrance that opened onto a parking lot where someone could have abducted her without drawing attention. Another theory is that Pam went to get her mail and was grabbed on her way back. Detectives canvassed the area and asked shoe store employees whether they had seen a barefoot woman, but turned up nothing. According to friends and family, Pam didn't live a high-risk lifestyle and was never known to party or go out to nightclubs. She definitely wasn't the type to just disappear without a trace. Her boyfriend was questioned, but he was working an hour away in Longmont at the time and was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Despite a massive search and thorough investigation, Pam was never found. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing a light green dress with a white lace collar, a tan leather jacket, and a turquoise bracelet and ring. 9 months later, on December 8, 1983, 17-year-old Melissa Lou Chase was found beaten to death under a bridge in Inglewood by her live-in boyfriend. The last time she was seen alive was around 5:30 p.m. the day before. 3 years before Pam's disappearance, 21-year-old Helene Przezinski was found murdered on January 18, 1980. She was discovered nude from the waist down, hands bound, and had been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. Helene's case had striking similarities to Pam's disappearance and led investigators to consider a possible connection. In 2019, DNA linked Helene's murder to James Curtis Clanton. It's unclear if he's been looked at in Pam's disappearance. Pam Lynne Neal stood 5 foot 3 inches, weighed 110 pounds, and had brown hair and brown eyes. If you have any information about Pam's disappearance, please don't hesitate to call the Inglewood Police Department at 303-762-2438. She went missing on March 31, 1983, and as of January 2026, she remains missing, and this case remains unsolved. Richard Glen Beebe, who went by Dick, was born on July 26, 1938. In 1956, he graduated from Avoca High School and then earned a business administration degree from the University of Arizona. At the age of 74, Dick was living in Denver, Colorado, with his roommate John Vigil when he tragically disappeared. While public websites such as Name Us and Charlie Project list the day he was last seen as July 7, 2013, I found that his son Michael's Facebook page listed that day as July 14th. Regardless, after his disappearance, his roommate John was questioned and said that he had asked Dick to move out. Strangely, though, all of his belongings were still there, including his medication, laptop, clothes, and cell phone. About a week later, his green Buick was found abandoned in a parking lot in Denver at the intersection of South Holly Street and East Florida Avenue. At some point after he went missing, his family received a text message from his phone saying he had met someone and was going to Arizona and would not be coming back. The text was unusual, as it didn't match his writing style and was not something his family felt he would do. His daughter-in-law, Judy, explained that the message was perfectly typed, punctuated, and spelled, which was not typical for her father-in-law. He also ended the message with, "Love to you and Michael, Dick." However, Judy said she found that strange because she always referred to him by his full name, Richard, not Dick. Because of this, they believe someone else sent the message and that Dick met with foul play, and that whoever was involved was the one who sent the text message. Interestingly, investigators say they already have a prime suspect, but do not have enough evidence to file charges. Most people believe that John is involved, especially with the text messages that were sent from Dick's phone and the fact that the phone was found in the home that he and Dick shared. In 2014, A year after Dick went missing, John was found wearing a U.S. Air Force uniform and claiming he was a homeless veteran who was suffering from PTSD. He was found living out of a Penske truck with his animals. People questioned his military status, and a U.S. Air Force spokesperson confirmed there was no record of him ever serving. When asked about the discrepancy,
spokesman with the U.S. Air Force says it has no record of Vigil ever serving.
Were you really in the military?
Yes.
How come the military has no record of you ever being in the military?
Because that's classified.
A woman named Patty Steenbuck then felt sorry for John and took him in, trying to help, but he repaid her by beating her up. He was then arrested and charged with battery. While Patty was recovering from the injuries, John met another woman who said she also felt sorry for him and took him in. The status of that relationship is unknown. It's now been over 10 years since Richard Dick Beebe disappeared, and no suspects have ever been arrested. If you have any information about his disappearance or presumed death, please call Metro Denver Crime Stoppers at 720-913-STOP. Dick stood 5 feet 10 inches tall with graying hair and blue eyes. He was last seen in July of 2013, and as of January 2026, he remains missing, and this case remains unsolved. Sheryl Parker, who went by Sherry, was born on July 8, 1955, to Donald and Charlotte Hahn. In 1972, Sherry and her family moved to Fort Collins, Colorado, where she later graduated from Fort Collins High School. By the age of 41, she was still living in Fort Collins with her husband, Glen Edward Parker, who went by Ed, and their 15-year-old daughter, Michelle, and working in payroll for Larimer County. She also had an 18-year-old daughter named Amanda. Since there's no mention of her living in the home, I believe she was living with her maternal grandparents, Donald and Charlotte. Before that, on the night of July 17th of the same year, Sherry told her husband, Ed, who was allegedly abusive, that she planned to file for divorce. After an argument, she left to distance herself, and her daughters never saw her alive again. After leaving the home, Michelle said her mother was heading to her best friend's home, but she ended up at the Budget Host Motel about 30 miles away in Del Camino, Colorado. Just before checking in, Sherry withdrew money from an ATM at the now-closed Steels Market on East Harmony Road and filled up her car at a nearby gas station on South LeMay Avenue. Ed didn't wait for her to return and instead reported her missing the following day on July 18th. 5 days later, on July 23, 1996, Ed and his brother contacted the investigator on the case to report that they had found her car in the motel's parking lot. It's unclear how they found the motel, but it's possible Ed already knew where she had gone. Investigators searched the car and found the motel receipt, but not much else. On July 26, a passerby found Sherry's body floating in the St. Vrain River. She'd suffered blunt force trauma to the head, and her death was ruled a homicide. While reports say that Ed lawyered up the day Sherry's body was found, Michelle says he lawyered up the day Sherry went missing. Regardless, the investigators say he's never cooperated or answered a single one of their questions. In 1997, Ed's attorney said that Ed could only answer questions from investigators provided they were submitted in writing. However, when the investigators obliged and sent in written questions, they never heard back. Ed then later married Sherry's best friend, who remains married to this day. According to investigators, any chance at recovering DNA was lost due to the river likely washing it away, and without a weapon, a witness, or a confession, no one has ever been charged. To this day, Ed remains the primary suspect. Michelle claims her father refused to talk to detectives because he told her they would twist his words and make him look guilty. She also said that her father was already involved with Sherry's best friend before Sherry's death, and a few months later, they began openly dating. Meanwhile, Michelle moved in with her sister and grandparents, who lived close by. If you have any information about the death of Sheryl Parker, please call Detective Byron Castellon at the Weld County Sheriff's Office at 970-400-2827. You can also submit tips to Northern Colorado Crime Stoppers by calling 1-800-222-TIPS or online at crimeshurt.com. Sherry was found murdered on July 26, 1996, and as of January 2026, her case remains unsolved.